Chapter 24, Leaks. I looked away from the digger in front of me and stole a nervous glance at a small box on my seat. It was a power core for a disruptor. I salvaged it from Jimmy's digger and strapped a detonator cap to it with medical tape. It looked like a horribly wrapped birthday present. I was going to use it to retaliate against the Landers, not because we were angry, although we were, but because we needed to show them that we were willing to fight even when we'd been fired at. The detonator wasn't powerful enough to do much damage on its own, but if I could throw this little bomb into the food silo, it would spoil all the food the Landers had stored. I reached over and touched the tape, being careful not to arm the cap. The box rocked a little, then settled into the leather. I looked back up at the rear of Teresa's digger. She had agreed to give digger driving a try after Jimmy's ordeal, and she was a natural. Finn was driving just ahead of her. Pavel was heading to the surface near the camp to keep watch. My radio crackled. "You're sure we'll have enough food if we do this?" Therese asked nervously. I sighed. We'd been over this point. "Yes, if we ration even a little, we can last the blackout." Finn came on the radio. "And I'll bet this is exactly the sort of attack the Landers don't expect." "Yes," I said, and I silently hoped. "All right, we're approaching the junction with the grinder cage. What do you do next, Finn?" Therese and I split off and head in different directions. "Good. Therese? Then we make as much noise as we can. If the Landers are listening, we'll act as decoys. How about you, rich boy?" Apparently, Fatima had spread around the nickname. Then I sneak up the middle and deliver our little present. "Good luck," Finn said cheerily. "Thanks. Now, radio's off. We'll be there in 5 minutes." There was a short buzz as the speakers turned off. I ignored it. I shouldn't have. The moment we hit the junction, there was a huge flash and a thunderous boom. Therese keened to the right in front of me as debris shot back over us and down the tunnel. Finn's voice came back at me, panicked. "I've been hit. There was a bomb." It was an ambush. "Retreat," I yelled, panicked. Teresa's digger stalled, and I turned sharply to avoid a crash. I ignited my disruptor and flew into the rock, turning again sharply to try to come out next to Finn. My digger burst through the wall. Finn was just in front of me, sitting in the cockpit of his digger. It had been ripped to shreds. He was alive, but everything around him was on fire. He was strapped in and struggling to get the belt off his shoulder. He saw me and looked over, his eyes wide with panic. "Christopher, help!" he said, desperately clutching at the belt as the flames grew closer to the cockpit. Something moved in the tunnel ahead of him. Landers, dressed in black overalls, were approaching, guns raised. "Finn, hurry!" They opened fire. Finn gave a cry and slumped forward in his seat, dead. More bullets flew, turning everything in front of me into a fireball. I slammed my digger in reverse and flew backwards, flame following me down the hole. My disruptor reset. I ignited it and disappeared sideways back into the rock, trying to get as far away as fast as I could. Tears filled my eyes. Finn had been so happy to be on a raid. He'd been so excited to lead the charge. If only I'd gone first, maybe I could have fought off the Landers. Maybe I could have protected him. I punched my steering wheel again and again. Finn had been the cannon fodder, and I'd been sitting behind, protected. I listened for Therese on the radio, but there was nothing. I hoped she'd escaped. If she'd gone into the wall to the right, she would be fine. If she'd stopped to help Finn, she was dead or captured. I slammed on the brakes. The bomb wobbled against my leg. I stared at it, then gritted my teeth. The bomb! The bomb! I gunned the engine, spun the steering wheel, and turned back. I broke through the wall, only about 20 feet from the site of the ambush. My digger landed on the floor with a crash and a thud. I spun and angled my nose back toward the wreckage. I pressed the detonator on the bomb. Standing in a row, staring straight at me, was a row of Landers, each wearing a gas mask. In a flash, it hit me. They knew. They knew about the radioactive bomb. They knew where we'd been heading. They knew about our plan from start to finish. And now they were going to kill me. I was going to die. The detonator began to blink red. I opened my cockpit and stood up. I threw the bomb just as the lead lander raised his gun at me and prepared to fire. It landed at his feet, but he stepped over it, advancing to get close enough for an accurate shot. I jumped back down, closed my hatch, and slammed the digger into drive. The digger hurtled toward the lead lander, who hesitated a second and then sent his shot into the tunnel wall. Suddenly, there was a blast to our left, and Therese burst through the wall. She slammed into the lander, sending them flying like rag dolls. The detonator went off, filling the tunnel with fumes and smoke. Therese didn't stop, but drove right through the other wall, her disruptor slicing through at top speed. "Follow me," her voice crackled on the radio. My disruptor was off, but I could follow. I quickly swerved to face the hole. I gunned the engine and darted inside. Shots blasted the ceiling and floor behind me, but they were firing blind, and I escaped undamaged. As we flew deeper and deeper into the core, my mind was racing. How could the landers have known the plan? They were clearly listening to our radios and had tracked us in the tunnel. The buzz I heard had been a blip from their tracking device as they zeroed in on us. I flicked off my radio quickly. But how did they know what frequency to listen to? How did they know exactly which tunnel we'd be heading down? It wasn't just that the landmine had been in exactly the right place. It was also the fact that the group of armed landers had been waiting there, prepped for both diggers and radioactive bombs. That wasn't random chance or an incredibly lucky guess. And those weren't things we talked about on the radio, so how could they know? There were only two possibilities. One, they were able to listen in on our planning meetings and knew exactly what we were going to do. Or two, someone had tipped them off. For a moment, I suspected Therese. It had been her first mission. She'd known the plans, but I discounted this quickly. I'd seen the look on her face when the digger swerved. That was fear you couldn't fake. She could have left me for dead, too, but she'd risked her life to save me. I flicked my radio back on. "Therese, we need to stop." "No, we need to get back to camp." "They might be following us. If they can track us back to camp, they'll kill everyone." Therese didn't say anything, but I saw her digger begin to slow ahead of me. "Let's find a tunnel, cut through, and then talk. Radios off." We clicked off our radios. A few minutes later, Therese cut through the wall of a tunnel. It was unlit, which meant it was probably new and hadn't been attached to the power grid yet. I figured that was a good thing. We'd see the lights from anyone else coming a mile away. We turned off our diggers and got out. I flicked on my headlamp. I felt sick to my stomach, but I needed to focus. "We need to make sure we can't be tracked. Then we need to get back to camp." She nodded. We searched our diggers for any trace of tracking devices. I wasn't even 100% sure what one would look like. It would have to be something small and that you could hide quickly. You need a lot of time and specialized tools to be able to put it inside the engine block or inside the hull. We pulled out the seats and ran our hands along the inside of the trunk and hood, anywhere you could gain easy access. "Christopher, if we do find something, then that means someone had to put it there." I nodded, but just kept looking, convinced we'd find something, but we found nothing. Therese gave a sigh of relief. I didn't. Just because nobody booby-trapped our diggers, it doesn't mean there isn't a traitor. "It could mean the landers found a way to listen to us back at camp," she said. "But if that were the case, why not attack the camp? Or were they on their way and this attack was a distraction to keep us away?" "We've got to get back," she said, suddenly panicked. "If the landers know where the camp is, they'll be headed there now." Therese jumped back in her digger. I waved to her before she could close the lid. "Let's keep radio silent until we get close, and don't mention anything about the attacks. We need to keep everyone calm so we can move without panic." "What do I say about Finn?" "We'll say he was brave, that he died in a cave-in as we were heading home. Until we know what's going on, we need to lie." She gave me a nod and we were off. The quickest way for landers to get to the camp was through the tunnels, starting from the storage depot. I assumed they'd have to attack on foot. The elevator had been the only way to get big machines below ground. They didn't, as far as we knew, have any diggers, so it would take them a while to find the camp in an underground maze. Even if they could pinpoint where the camp was, they would need to keep turning down different tunnels until they got there. But if I were wrong, we'd be sitting ducks. Pavel was listening for any sign of movement near the surface. he'd never even hear landers marching underneath. I had a sickening thought. Maybe we'd brought a homing device back with the food we'd taken from the landers. Maybe they wanted us to steal their food. We used the storeroom as a meeting room. If they'd been listening in, they'd have known everything we'd been planning, all the raids and all the places where we'd moved our supplies and spare diggers, all the ways we could possibly escape them if they did attack. But that didn't make sense. We'd blown up a key elevator shaft after we'd stolen the food. Why would they let that happen? I thought back to Coventry, Elena's lecture on how far a real leader was prepared to go to win. Had the Landers allowed us to win one small victory in order to win the war against us, or had someone else? But if there was a spy, who could it be? Finn was dead. If he'd been the traitor, he'd been a bad one. Alec was starting to come around, but was still practically in a walking coma. Jimmy had barely left his bed for 2 days. Pavel, Mandeep, the other grinders. I ran through all the probabilities, and 2 names kept rising to the top of the list. The 2 living people who probably meant the most to me in the world, Fatima and Elena. Elena was always questioning my decisions. She'd manipulated the last few meetings to get her way and had devised much of the strategy. She knew every bit of our plans down to the minutest detail. Elena had been up top for days after the attacks. What if the Landers hadn't overlooked her? What if they had captured her and trained her, brainwashed her somehow? What if she'd traded her life for the rest of our lives? No, I wouldn't believe that. Elena would never do that. Could Fatima? If I were a grinder, I'd feel no love lost for a corporation that used me like that. Fatima knew the tunnels like the back of her hands. She'd be able to give pinpoint directions to every stage of an attack. She'd been in the digger with me, and she knew what radio frequency we'd been using. No, I shook my head. That was also impossible. It had to be the Landers. The Landers must have hidden a monitor or bug inside the food we'd stolen. They must have. I'd go back to camp and look. There would be some evidence. I'd find the bug, floored the digger, and sped back to camp.